everyone, welcome to our first of 3 videos on the plant kingdom. Important notes on this slideshow presentation will be in blue font, just to help you know what's important. All right, so first off, what is the study of plants? Like so far, we've studied a bunch of different things. We've studied taxonomy, which is the study of classifying living things, genetics, the study of inherited traits, biology, the study of living things, ecology, the study of how living things interact. But what's the study of plants? Well, it's called botany. Botany is the study of plants. So if you ever hear somebody say that they're a botanist, that means they study and work with plants. All right, what's the difference between a plant and an animal? So you might remember we've talked about characteristics of living things, and there's some vocabulary words we learned, but some differences between plants and animals are that plants are autotrophs. They do photosynthesis. They get their own energy from the sun. Most of the plants are sessile, meaning they cannot move, and they have cell walls that are made up of cellulose. So we talked about that way back when we talked about macromolecules. Cellulose is a type of carbohydrate that makes cell walls in plants. But even though there are a lot of key differences between plants and animals, there still are some similarities. Some similarities are that they are multicellular, both plants and animals are. They're both eukaryotic, so they have complex cells. They have the ability to live in many diverse ecosystems, so they're adapted in that way. And also, they both have DNA in their nucleus, so plants and animals both have DNA. All right, question here, you try this out. What is the study of plants called? It's botany. How about what is one thing that makes plants different from animals? And actually, for Edpuzzle, I'm going to ask you, what is something that is not different between plants and animals? All right. Some of the differences are that the plants are autotrophs that are sessile and they have a cell wall made of cellulose, but there are some similarities. So you were supposed to pick the similar one. Some similar things are going to be listed here, but the question I'm going to ask you in Edpuzzle is, what is something that does not make plants and animals similar? So I'm going to list the similarities, and you pick the one that is not a similarity. But what makes them similar? They're multicellular, they're eukaryotic, they inhabit diverse ecosystems, and they have their own DNA. All right, what do plants need in order to survive? So since they are different from animals, they're sessile, they're autotrophs, they are different, so they have different things that they need in order to survive. And the things that plants need are sunlight, water and minerals that come from the soil, gas exchange, so the ability to take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, and the movement of their water and nutrients up from the roots, up the stems, and out through the leaves. There are various different types of plants that we're going to talk about in the next couple of videos, and they do these things slightly differently from each other. And of course, plants also must reproduce in order to continue their species to the next generation. So plants reproduce in kind of an interesting way. There's something called alternation of generations, and that means that plants have two separate life stages. They have a life stage called the sporophyte generation, and that's when plants are diploid and producing spores. And remember, diploid means they have double the amount of DNA. It's kind of like a full set of DNA, if you will. So like our mature cells are diploid, and plants' mature cells in the sporophyte generation are also diploid. Gametophyte generation is the other life stage, and that's when the cells are haploid. That means they have half the DNA, and that means they're producing gametes, which are like essentially sperm and egg cells. So sporophyte is diploid, having the full set of DNA and producing spores, and gametophyte is haploid, and it means having half the DNA and producing gametes. So you can see that in some pictures here. This is actually the same exact plant. It's just in its two different life stages. So in the sporophyte stage of this fern, essentially, so it has a full set of DNA and spores are being produced, which you can see the spores on the bottom side of a fern's leaf. You might have seen that before in nature. And basically those spores then are going to undergo meiosis, and that's going to produce an organism or a stage of the organism's life that has half of the DNA. In other words, it's a gamete. And this is the gametophyte generation, where the sperm and the egg will be produced, and then it will be fertilized to make the sporophyte generation and produce spores, which will then develop into a stage of life that can produce the egg and sperm, which will then be fertilized. And you see how the cycle goes on and on and on. But like in ferns, for example, the sporophyte generation is very obvious to see, and the gametophyte looks very different from the sporophyte generation within the alternation of generations life stages. You can also see that in other types of plants as well. So in these two pictures, the haploid or gametophyte stage is in where the blue arrows are, and then the diploid or sporophyte stage is where the pink arrows are. So like the adult plant is in the sporophyte generation, and you can see like an adult plant's flower, and then it produces the gametes, which are then that's going to be part of the gametophyte generation, where they're going to be fertilized, and then you have sporophyte, gametophyte. You can see that in flowering plants. You can also see that in coniferous plants. So like the seedling and developing into a full tree that produces cones is going to be the diploid stage, which is the sporophyte generation. And then you have a gametophyte generation as well, where you have half of the DNA or haploid stage of those plants' life. All right, so what is one thing that plants need in order to survive? So think about like which is true of the answer choices. What do plants need in order to survive? And you might have picked any of these things: sunlight, water, minerals, gas exchange, movement of water and nutrients, and the ability to reproduce. All right, what is a word for two life stages in plants? That is called alternation of generations. And what does it mean when in the alternation of generations, when you have a diploid, or like having the full amount of DNA and producing spores? What life phase is that? That's sporophyte. What is it called when it's the haploid life phase, when the egg and sperm are being made? Good, that's gametophyte. All right, and then just for review, because you're going to see one of these in the next video, what kind of a diagram is this? We just talked about this a couple weeks ago. What is this called? It's a cladogram. Thanks so much for listening. Tune back in for the second video.